What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. While everyone is glued to the headlines about the next potential peace talks in Geneva, something far less flashy is happening quietly in the background. Something that does not trend, something that does not come with dramatic speeches or bold red lines on the map. The Russian government is piling on debt at a pace that would make even the most reckless consumer credit addict nervous. And it is doing it at almost invisibly, hoping that nobody notices the scale until it's way too late. And in order to maintain this debt, they literally started stealing money from its own population. Well, not openly, of course, that will cause unrest, well, something that the Kremlin definitely cannot afford under any circumstances, but rather through some clever financial schemes and outright pyramids. The general population of Russia is unfortunately not the most educated one, so just by adding fancy financial words here and there, the government can easily get away with these literal scams. We have already talked about the 2025 budget deficit ballooning to 5.7 trillion rubles, but that number alone does not tell the whole real story. The real issue is not just the deficit itself, it's how that deficit is being financed, how fast the borrowing is accelerating, and why a state that publicly claims to be financially stable is taking on loans at interest rates usually associated with payday lenders. 7 trillion rubles borrowed in a single year. Record-breaking bond placements, one day alone bringing in nearly 1% of GDP in borrowed money, and all of it at around 15% interest. Trillions of rubles at almost credit card rates. How sustainable is it, do you think? At first glance it makes no sense. The government officially still has a massive national wealth fund. On paper there is even money, enough to cover deficit for years, but well, exactly that on paper. So why is the Kremlin acting like someone with a maxed out credit card rolling one loan into another? Why is it choosing debt over reserves? And more importantly, who will end up paying the bill when this house of borrowed money starts to inevitably shake? To answer that, we need to talk about what having money actually means, and why not all money is actually usable so-called money, and how cash crunch can hit even a government that claims to have trillions in reserve. And once we understand that, the consequences become far more uncomfortable, at least for the Kremlin. The first thing we need to clear up is a simple but deeply misunderstood concept. Not all money is equal. On paper, assets may look impressive. In reality, what matters is whether they can be used right now, without massive losses. Most people have experienced this at least once in their lives. You might technically own a lot, but when the bills arrive, and sometimes like unexpectedly high bills, you suddenly realize that, well, apparently you're short on cash, on actual cash. Think of it this way. You may have savings, foreign currency, deposit accounts, someone who owes you money, maybe even property. Nominally you are doing fine. But the moment you urgently need a large amount of cash, everything changes. Your foreign currency is exchanged at the worst rate possible. Your deposit loses your deposit loses its yield if it is withdrawn early. Your debtor cannot repay immediately. Your apartment cannot be sold overnight without a painful discount. And suddenly your theoretical wealth shrinks dramatically the moment you try to use it. It makes sense, right? This is what liquidity in financial markets really means. It's not about how much you own on paper. It's about how fast you can turn it into spendable money and at what cost. And always urgency punishes value. The faster you need cash, the bigger the loss. The Russian government is in exactly this position. It has reserves, yes, kinda. But a large share of those reserves is not sitting in neat piles of rubles ready to be transferred to pay pensions, salaries or subsidies. Some of it is in foreign currency, some in securities that cannot be dumped without crushing prices, some in gold that requires logistics, buyers and time. Some even is tied up in long-term projects that will not return anything for years, if ever. So when year-end obligations arrive all at once, the government cannot simply wave a wand and turn gold bars or infrastructure investments into cash balances. Government accounts work just like yours. If the money is not there at the moment it is needed, payments do not magically happen. And when the gap between incoming revenue and outgoing obligations opens suddenly, the only solution is, guess what? Borrowing. This is the uncomfortable reality behind the illusion of wealth. On paper, the state looks, well, kinda solvent, but in practice, it's facing a cash gap that forces it to go shopping for loans fast and everywhere it can. And once borrowing becomes routine rather than exceptional, things escalate quickly. Which brings us to how this borrowing machine actually works and why it is spinning faster than ever before. When a regular person runs into a cash gap, they swipe a credit card. When the Russian government does, well, it usually issues federal loan bonds. These облигации федерального займа, ОФЗ, securities, are sold to banks which transfer real money to government accounts in exchange for a promise of repayment years down the line, plus obviously interest. On paper this looks kinda orderly, responsible even. But the scale and frequency have become alarming. In the entire year before the war, the government borrowed 2.6 trillion rubles this way. Fast forward to now, and that amount has neatly tripled. One single day saw 1.8 trillion rubles borrowed at once. 69% of pre-war annual borrowing in a single day. That's not routine financing, that's emergency behavior. Yet what makes this possible is the structure of the banking system itself. Banks are required to park a portion of their clients' deposits in what are considered so-called safe instruments. Under sanctions, well, their choices are limited. Foreign sovereignty bonds are largely off the table. Well, that leaves just pretty much domestic government bonds as one of the very few viable options. Add high interest rates to the mix and suddenly these OFS bonds become irresistible, almost even mandatory. There is also another layer to this. The central bank plays a quiet but very critical role. Through short-term lending operators, it supplies banks with liquidity that can then be used to buy government bonds. The bonds are later resold, the loans repaid, and the money quietly ends up in, guess where? Government accounts. On paper, no direct money creation happened, but in reality, new money entered circulation disguised as debt. This setup allows the government to spend aggressively without openly admitting to expanding the money supply. Well, money supply goes up, inflation goes up. That's pretty much one thing you need to know. It's accounting shenanigans, the best way to say it. Elegant, complicated, and also very dangerous. Because once this borrowed money hits the economy, it does not just sit idle. It is spent immediately to cover obligations that were underestimated or postponed. And that raises the most important question of them all. If the government and banks are passing money back and forth between themselves, well, who is actually paying the bill when the music quiets down? Well, guess what? Pause the video and let us know down below in the comments. To answer that, we need to look beyond balance sheets and straight into people's wallets, which is exactly where we're heading next. Here is the part that rarely makes it in official explanations. These federal bonds may circulate between ministries, banks, and financial institutions, but the consequences do not stay there. They do not evaporate inside spreadsheets. They flow downward. And at the very bottom of this structure sits, guess who? Ordinary people, ordinary Russians. This entire setup functions like a pyramid, just dressed in respectable financial language. At the top there are government and the banking sector. They borrow, lend, refinance, reshuffle obligations among themselves. Interest payments circulate within the system. Balance sheets stay afloat. On paper, everything looks kind of even controlled. Well, because they are the ones who fill these papers. But pyramids do not collapse from the top. They collapse from the bottom. The borrowed money does not just vanish after the government spends it. It expands the amount of money circulating in the economy. Once again, the inflation goes up. That means inflation, prices rise, not dramatically overnight, but steadily enough to be felt in grocery stores, utility bills, and just basic services and necessities. Wages, meanwhile, do not keep up, salaries lag, pensions stall, social payments are paused. People earn roughly the same, but, well, can afford way less month after month. At the same time, interest rates increase. Banks pass the cost down to consumers once again. Mortgages become more expensive, car loans balloon, credit cards bite harder. A family that was barely managing suddenly finds itself squeezed from all sides. Not because they made reckless decisions, but because the system quietly changed the rules while they were not looking. This is where the pyramid becomes visible. Those at the very top are protected. They borrow first, spend first, adjust first. Well, they know the rules of the game because they are the ones who invented this game in the first place. And if some rules need to be changing, they are the ones to change it as well. While those at the very bottom of this pyramid absorb the shock later, through inflation, high borrowing costs, first of all. Savings lose value, long-term plans fall apart. The money people thought they had slowly dissolves without anyone formally taking it away. And when things finally crack, they, well, do not crack evenly. The institutions will be bailed out, restructured, or quietly supported. The regular people will not. They will be told that it's just temporary, that all of this is not necessary, we're at war, guys, that everyone must tighten their belts, we have this saying in Russian, but these belts can only be tightened so far before something snaps. This is why excessive borrowing is never neutral. It always has a social target, and in this case, that target is painfully clear. Once you understand who ultimately pays for the debt machine, the remaining choices the government has become much easier to understand. And those choices are exactly what we need to talk about in our final chapter. When debt becomes permanent, government do not look for good solutions. They look for just survivable ones. And the menu is very short. Option number 1 is quietly redirecting private savings, turning deposits into patriotic instruments, promising returns, restricting access to the principal, and framing it all as a contribution to the national stability. It's already being rhetorically prepared, with officials suddenly expressing intense interest in how much money citizens have tucked away. Well, that enthusiasm is not accidental. Guess why? The second option is a domestic default, simply announcing that obligations will not be honored. This resets the state clean, refreshes the system, but freezes the entire financial system. Banks stall, transactions halt, trust evaporates. It's a nuclear option for the economy and one that carries unpredictable consequences. And then we have the third option, which is the most subtle and historically familiar. Devaluation. Letting the national currency weaken sharply. This instantly boosts budget revenues denominated in foreign currency, while keeping domestic expenses lagging behind. Inflation follows, but with a delay, and in that delay lies political breathing room. All three options inevitably shift the burden onto the population in the end, either through lost savings, frozen assets, or reduced purchasing power. The technical method differs, but the result is the same. People are the ones who end up paying, quietly, incrementally, until they do not. The real question is not which option the government prefers, it is how far it believes it can go without provoking resistance. That invisible line once crossed cannot be undone, and history shows that regimes are often terrible at knowing where the line actually is. What we're watching unfold is not a sudden collapse, it's a slow-motion stress test, a system that survives by borrowing time, money, and patience, hoping that the breaking point always lies just a little bit further ahead. For now, the strategy is simple: just borrow, disguise, delay, repeat, keep the damage dispersed, keep the pain uneven, keep people unsure who to blame. But debt does not just simply disappear, it waits. And eventually, it demands clarity. Someone must pay, someone must lose. The only uncertainty is how openly it will happen and how much social pressure the system can absorb before it cracks. The Kremlin's fiscal policy moving forward will be guided by a single unspoken rule: extract as much as possible without triggering open resistance. That kind of works until, well, it doesn't. And when it stops working, no amount of accounting tricks or borrowed trillions will be enough to restore the trust. And now that we have walked through how the illusion of money, the borrowing machine, and the human cost all connect, it is worth stepping back and think about what this all means for the months ahead. Because the numbers are no longer abstract. They are already shaping reality. And if you want to explore where this road leads next, how these choices collide with social stability, and which warning signs matter the most, please subscribe to my channel, and we will talk about it in one of our future videos. If you also want to support our work, there are links down below. For example, you can see an additional chapter at the end of each episode. It's on my Patreon. Once again, the link is down below. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.